promises. Yes, I did. So I get that, truly.
All right, let's call this meeting to order. I guess Michelle ain't here. Ms. Atkins Austin, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Dr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Fraley? Here. Mr. Crute?
Here.
Mr. Patterson?
Here.
Mrs. O'Connor? Here. Ms. French? Here. Mr. Weiss?
All right, thank you very much. Our next item of business is the approval of the agenda. Anyone have any changes that need to be made to it? Any emendations?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the second. All those in favor by voice vote, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Our next item of business is the consideration of the minutes, which have also been included in the packet. Any changes that need to be made? Mr. Conner, you want to give us a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as they stand.
Second.
Ms. O'Connor has made a motion. Ms. Fraley seconded. All those in favor by voice acclamation, please say aye.
Aye.
All those, any opposed? Abstentions? All right, our next item of business is public participation. This is where speakers have 3 minutes to make statements on non-agenda items. Ms. Atkins Austin, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
No, sir.
All right. Well, then our next item of business then is a public hearing for CUP 25-006. Thornhaven on behalf of the Rosemeyer Corporations requesting amendment to an existing conditional use permit that was approved by Town Council in January 2024. Do I hear a motion to open the public hearing?
So move.
Mr. Crute has made a motion.
Second.
Mr. Patterson is second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? All righty. Ms. Atkins Austin, would you please give us a staff report?
Thank you. The request is to amend the existing conditional use permit that was approved by Town Council in January of 2025. The amendment will be to allow for an additional 2 mini warehouse units and the removal of the 1 acre outdoor parking storage area. The site will contain a total of 934 storage units in 8 buildings and an office building. There were no significant impacts to the infrastructure or environmental impacts to the site noted on the original request. This amendment does not alter that conclusion. Staff recommends the approval of amendment of the conditional use permit with the conditions stated in Resolution 2025-01-01. Those conditions were listed as limit the hours of operations for customers to 6:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week, that the conditional use permit approval is conditioned on the approval of the subdivision plat by the Town Council. That subdivision plat was approved by Town Council at the January 8th, 2025 regular meeting, so we could remove that condition. If the subject CUP is approved, a site plan is required for this development, which meets all the ordinance requirements. In accordance with the zoning ordinance, the plan will be submitted to the Planning Commission for review and approval. We could also amend this condition because plan review for site plans no longer goes before a board for review. It is by state law administrative only. I can answer any questions about the staff report at this time, and we do have the applicant in the audience to answer any questions about the project.
Any questions for Ms. Atkins Austin?
I'm just curious if, I know there's been some kind of changes property-wise, retaining pond, et cetera. If you could just kind of walk through some of those key items.
Sure. So I'm Kristen Smiley on behalf of the Rosemeyer Corporation. What happened is once we, before we purchased the land, we have them come in and do a wetland delineation. And it was decided that those creeks are wetland. So where the parking was going to go, we're now going to have to do a bigger pond there. And so kind of to help with revenues, we ended up adding 2 more buildings to make up for that parking.
And am I correct, will that then adjust what you were seeking to do with the outdoor
Right.
storage space?
Yeah, completely gone with the outdoor parking. Yes, sir.
Any other questions for the applicant or for staff? Are there other speakers that have signed up to speak during the public hearing?
Yes, sir. Mr. Watts?
Mr. Watts?
Good evening. I have a quick question. Is the easement as far as right of way to get to it and all, is this in this packet here? I haven't had a chance to go through it. That's my question. I know very little other than what was mailed to me a couple of weeks ago. The property in question is my deceased mother's. It's recently been transferred to me in the deed books. I just was wondering where the right-of-way may be. Her corner of her property is a little thin slice of pie between Walmart and then I see where Mr. Barksdale lived on that dead-end street there. I just was wondering where the easement will it come from Marywood Farm Road or from another way from like Perry Drive where Shules and all that is. I'm not sure where the right-of-way, where people will be coming in and out. And will there be a fence put around or some type of fence, or will it be just open?
I can answer part of that, and then maybe Kristen can answer the other part. The entrance will be off of Perry Drive, will be the entrance. But Kristen, do you want to answer the question about the fence?
So it will be gated. We put up the keypad, so it's, access in and out is gated. But yeah, there'll be fencing up. The only thing that'll be outside of the fence will be the office.
The office?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. And if there's anything else y'all want to say, go ahead, but you answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anybody else sign up to speak?
No, sir.
I think that concludes the public hearing. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved?
Ms. Fraley has made a motion.
Second.
Mr. Cruz made a second. All those in favor of closing the public hearing by voice acclamation, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. So let's shift over into deliberation. Anyone want to begin?
Mr. Chair, I think just given the deliberation we went through the last time, I think that was substantive, and it seems like the changes that are being brought forth are reasonable, given the adjustment to the retaining pond. And so I'd feel comfortable to move forward and support.
And I'd hazard that I think one of the objections last time was a concern about some of the lighting around the parking lot. So I think that's going to abate that potential objection by some of the neighbors. And I appreciate y'all's sensitivity to the environment over there.
Yeah, it'll be less light.
Other thoughts or comments? Do I hear a proposal to make a recommendation to council?
Mr. Chair, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the conditional use permit requested by Thorn Harvin on behalf of the Rosemary Corporation to amend existing conditional use permit by adding an additional 2 mini warehouses, self-storage buildings, and the removal of the 1 acre outdoor parking storage area with conditions stated in Resolution 2025-01-01.
Mr. Patterson's made a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Ms. O'Connor is seconded. Is there any further conversation?
So, Ms. Olson, the motion as presented, does it address the conditions that were put in place previously that are no longer applicable?
I think you can make an amendment to change those conditions.
We have friendly amendment, sir.
Would you like a friendly amendment, Mr. Cruz?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a friendly amendment.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to remove 2 of the conditions from 2025 Text 0101. The first being the subdivision plot, the requirement that the subdivision plot be approved by town council, as that has already been completed. And the second being that a site plan is required to be submitted to the planning commission.
Y'all okay with that? Okay. Any further deliberation, conversation? Ms. Atkins-Austin, would you please take a roll call vote?
Mrs. O'Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Mr. Patterson,
Yes.
Ms. French,
Yes.
Mr. Crute,
Aye.
Dr. Miller.
Yes.
Motion passes.
The motion has passed. Thank you all very much. Good luck. All right, our next item of business is old business with a discussion of the sidewalk ordinance. And I know we have our town attorney here, Ms. Douglas. But Ms. Atkins-Austin, can you would you just kind of brief us on some of the background, please?
Yes, sir. In 2024, Planning Commission and Town Council voted to amend the sidewalk provision in the subdivision article. That is in your staff report as attachment 1, the existing ordinance language, as well as add a sidewalk requirement in the site plan provision. The requirement in the site plan provision calls for sidewalks for any project requiring a site plan. These projects include all new structures, all renovated structures, and all additions to existing structures. The site plan requirement does have a few exceptions, including individual single-family homes, individual two-family homes, accessory uses where the land disturbance is less than 2,500 square feet, bona fide agricultural operations, and filling and grading operations where the land disturbance is less than 2,500 square feet. The site plan requirement ensures that we get sidewalks on parcels being developed for commercial, multifamily, or townhome projects. Today's discussion will center on sidewalks specifically in relation to the subdivision ordinance. A little background on the subdivision ordinance. Per section 2981, subdivision means to divide any tract of parcel or lot of land into 2 or more parts for the purpose of transfer of ownership or building development. There are some exceptions to when the subdivision requirements are required to be met. Those are listed in section 2964A1B. This section allows the subdivision agent to permit a boundary line adjustment, a lot line vacation, or the separation of one parcel without complying with all the requirements of the subdivision article. As long as the subdivision is not in conflict with the general meaning and purpose of the zoning chapter, no new streets are required to serve the parcel, and the lot meets or exceeds all zoning requirements. So staff performs a full subdivision review for any subdivision plat when a parcel is subdivided into more than 2 lots. Staff would also perform a full subdivision review if a plat tries to accomplish multiple items, such as a lot line vacation and a lot split together. The subdivision article contains the platting requirements and design standards for site plans of subdivisions and the contents that are required on a final plat of subdivision for recording. In August of 2025, Planning Commission held a public hearing on a revision to the zoning text for sidewalks within the subdivision article. This was attachment 2 in your staff report. The Planning Commission voted to defer the case pending additional review and data. At its work session in September 2025, Town Council discussed the sidewalk ordinance and the need for the option to waive the requirement in certain circumstances. Staff and town attorneys worked on drafting what an ordinance would look like with a set of criteria to be met for the requirement of sidewalks and what an ordinance would look like with a set of exemptions. These are attachments 3 and 4 in your staff report. Staff has also provided crash data from the Farmville Police Department from 2020 to October 2025, pedestrian crash data, a memorandum on the intersection of pedestrian infrastructure and pedestrian safety, the sidewalk inventory map from the Farmville 2035 Transportation Plan, and the VDOT pedestrian accommodations flowchart. The sidewalk inventory map was presented to show planning commissioners that we do have a transportation plan that calls out proposed sidewalks. This is a document staff would reference to see if the proposed subdivision is in an area of the adopted comprehensive plan, which refers back to the transportation plan, says requires sidewalks. The VDOT pedestrian accommodations flow chart was presented to Planning Commission to give commissioners an idea of what document staff referred to when the ordinance asks if sidewalks are reasonably required in the subdivision. I can answer any questions related to the staff report. Mr. Dvorak is available to answer questions related to the memorandum, and Ms. Douglas with Elder, Freeman, and Allen is also in attendance to aid in the sidewalk discussion.
Thank you very much. Before we take any questions directed to you, Mr. Dvorak, you have anything to add? I do. Ms. Douglas, you got anything to add?
No, sir.
Thank you all for being here. Let me piggyback off that real quick, just to provide some amplifying and complementary information. In part, just to kind of testify to the hard work these folks have been doing. If you recall, we did postpone making a decision on this back in August because I think all conceptually, we all appreciated the idea of having sidewalks on both sides of the street. But we heard from some members of the public, including members of the development industry, who said there are some downstream costs to having sidewalks on both sides of the street that may inadvertently kind of impact our aspirations to especially increase the affordable housing stock in town. And so we kind of found ourselves, if you recall, on the horns of a dilemma. How do we implement, on one hand, the comp plan's emphasis on walkability and pedestrian safety? And Mr. Dvorak, thank you very much for kind of collecting the information that demonstrated that sidewalks do make a significant impact on pedestrian safety and reduce injuries and fatalities. But on the other hand, we want to be flexible enough. We don't want to create, inadvertent costs and encumber not just developers, but have them pass that cost on to, potential homeowners and price people out of the market when we know that's an issue here in town. And so town council did take a look at this and referred it back to us. So we have an opportunity to do what we're trained to, and we've been, I think, doing a pretty good job on the last few years here. So in addition to accumulating that information on safety, I know construction costs were a little harder to pin down just because of the moving target in terms of materials and labor costs, and it's always situationally contingent. I did hear from some builders that to kind of make each one of those sidewalk cuts would cost at least $8,000 to do it during VDOT standards, and again, that's a cost that would ultimately be passed off onto the homeowner. So again, what we were trying to do, what the initial thing was, is the initial stab at it was to think of it in terms of, I think it's the language, the proposed ordinance that is kind of exception driven. I'm not sure what attachment that is. If you could bring it up, Ms. Atkins, also on the screen. Okay. The one that says insert exceptions. And so we met with staff and talking about this, and we said, well, if there's an opportunity to kind of focus on this, to kind of, as Ms. Atkins Austin said, to kind of establish expectations, what we aspire to, based on what the comprehensive plan kind of it lays out. Likewise, I think we heard loud and clear from multiple stakeholders that one of the other expectations was clarity, but also kind of fairness, but flexibility too. And so we kind of pivoted it back. And again, thank you very much, Ms. Douglas, for helping out with this. And so what I'd like to kind of draw our attention to and start as a starting point is the page that precedes it, the proposed link, the page that I think follows it, the one that says 2025 draft of proposed sidewalk ordinance with criteria. And I'd hazard that kind of presents us a starting point that we can work versus, kind of imagine all the potential, exceptions that could or could not be relevant. And so if you concur, again, I'd like to start to thinking about what we got. But you'll also see that with criteria, there's still some blanks that we need to fill in. And so what I'd like to begin our conversation with, after we have an opportunity to ask any questions that you all may have for staff and for Ms. Douglas, is 5 things in particular. The first is, you'll see that the first condition is the subdivision results in, blank number or more of parcels. And so I think we need to consider at what point in time what's the threshold for kind of triggering this. You'll notice that the prefatory language requires that a 5-foot sidewalk be installed, constructed, and dedicated on all town property subdivided. And so we're beginning with the notion that there is going to be a sidewalk. And so do we need to, I think the other thing we need to think about too is what would be the sidewalk for both sides of the street? What would be the criteria for both sides of the street? And then third, as Ms. Fraley, in your neighborhood, for instance, it's a phased development. And so the sidewalk's in. And so, how do we kind of account for that if we can? And then I think coming back to the single sidewalk, we need to address one of the precipitating considerations that prompted this revisitation of the ordinance, namely on which side of the street, shall a sidewalk be put on. And then finally, I think if we have time this evening, is to have a conversation of, what do we consider a sidewalk? Looking at some of the ordinances of other municipalities that are comparable to Farmville, we can think about a sidewalk in terms of our conventional gutter and curb, but there's options. Other municipalities kind of define it as pedestrian pathways. And so, again, I think if y'all like the proposed sidewalk ordinance with criteria, I think we could flesh that out with those kind of 5 topics. But first, again, want to offer any opportunities for questions for staff and for our attorney. Ms. Fraley?
Ashley, I have a question about the pedestrian vehicle data. I know that I see data from Farmville PD. Was Longwood University Police asked for their data?
No, we just did town data.
Okay.
So that that report would be separate from any Longwood LUPD incidents?
I would guess if there was an accident on Longwood's campus that it would go through the Longwood PD. I'm not really sure how they work that.
That's my understanding, is that because it's a different jurisdiction.
So what if someone was like on Griffin, and like LUPD responded?
It could be LUPD that has that data.
Okay. All right. Other questions?
So in the vein of data, so ADT versus annual average daily traffic, are we referring to the same thing? Because I know online at VDOT, I could only find AADT, and there were no data sets for ADT. So trying to get a frame of reference on what 400 versus 2,000 versus 8,000 means to roads here in Farmville. And then potentially after reviewing that data, a question would be on the secondary system requirements. I'd be curious about why there seems to be a lap or a gap, right? It's like the acreage and then 400, and then it jumps to 2,000 and then 8,000. And so I think without that data set specific to town, it's a little bit hard to interpret where that would be applicable.
So if I'm hearing you ask correctly, you're like, what are the comparable streets or the comparable, where you see that ADT?
Yeah, because open source, you only find, like on VDOT's website, you only find AADT. And so it's hard to frame that problem set.
Yeah, we can look in and ask VDOT what the difference is between those two.
But do you have a sense now of like what streets, like in Farmville, or what roads in Farmville would have, ADTs comparable to what's in the flow chart?
I believe, like South Main is going to be closer to like 19,000 ADT. So I don't know, what does Perry Drive look like? What is that ADT? That might be something closer to what's in the flow chart. I'd have to look at VDOT data to see which streets are comparable.
Other questions?
So at the last meeting, when this first came up, it was being pretty specifically put forward to close a loophole. And in the last language, it says, let's see here, required along the frontage of each residential lot. And that language isn't present in the proposals. So are we not so focused on trying to have it on both sides of the sidewalk, or where are we on that?
That can be part of y'all's discussion.
Okay.
I got a thought on that, but I have a question that Mr. Kreut's question prompted. And so it looks like, this flow chart that we have, the criterion or the metrics that they're using is lot size and the average daily trips. And, I see some of the other ordinances and some of the municipalities, focus on the kind of road, local versus feeder versus whatnot. But staff is recommending in that first condition, the subdivision results in parcels. Can you speak to why thinking about parcels or thinking about lots is more advantageous or more appropriate for Farmville than, say, lot size or ADT or neighborhood design or things like that, please?
It's stuff just feels like having a set number is a little easier to enforce and easier when you go to review. So you were just looking at this plat, and this plat is 51 lots, so yes, sidewalks required. Instead of saying, okay, let's pull out every parcel and see what the size is of every parcel. Do they all fall within that quarter to a half acre lot? Let's pull the traffic study. What's the ADT? Does it meet this? It just seems like it flows a little easier and quicker for staff to have a set number of lots than to have to look at multiple documents.
But would it maybe make sense to have, I understand having a number of parcels, and I think that makes sense, but maybe there's like a minimum size or something, or a maximum size that you don't have to have sidewalks. And I'm thinking about where I live. I live on Creekwood, and the lots are larger, and the houses are pretty far apart from one another. And we're also a cul-de-sac, so we don't get a lot of traffic. So, sidewalks don't make a lot of sense there. They're not really necessary. Pathways or something might be nice, because we do have a lot of walkers that come down there. But I was just wondering if saying something like, low density, where it's maybe less than one dwelling unit per acre or something like that, wouldn't require sidewalks.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because then you think about parcel, but what if it's you have a multifamily building on that parcel? Then, the density, you're right, becomes an issue there.
Yeah, I definitely think where you've got more density, where you've got multifamily buildings,
Right.
I could see sidewalks being a really good thing to have.
Right. What's your thoughts on that?
I'm just listening. This is your discussion for y'all to discuss not necessarily for us to tell you what we want to see.
Right, right. Well, I guess the question is, and if I'm hearing you correctly, or maybe I'm inspired by your observation, Ms. O'Connor, is why not think about it in terms of density versus, say, lot? Or does density play a role when you get to the site plan?
I think you might be able to base it on the zoning district. So if it's R1 and it does have larger lots, but then that gets into what if we start having discussions on the comp plan saying, oh, we want to decrease the street frontage requirement in R1.
Well, I was thinking of the density when I thought of that. It was more of looking at this proposal where we have exceptions that we were inserting. So that was kind of it.
And it could go back to the lot sizes. Is your subdivision that has a lower density with larger lots, are they going to not have as many lots? Are they going to keep those to around 20 lots for a cul-de-sac, as opposed to a higher density with maybe 30 to 40 lots?
And I mean, I guess that could be a starting point of the conversation. Again, I thought with criteria, kind of approached it from a positive standpoint. These are kind of the expectations. But again, if we find it unwieldy, or we need some kind of a little bit more flexibility, where we say, here's some exceptions, then we certainly can go there. I just, if one of if what I'm hearing from folks is, the aspiration is consistency, and it can be applied across the board, and it's clarity. And then if we start saying, okay, well, there has to be exceptions made, and what's the route for that, then all of a sudden this becomes a much less nimble ordinance that has to go through a bunch of kind of exceptions, and then kind of introduces the opportunity for, over time, some kind of subjectivity in terms of interpretation. But if people think that's a risk that we want to take, let's roll with it. I mean, whatever y'all.
John? I particularly enjoy the width criteria because I think it does provide more clarity to people. And I think if we go down the road of exceptions, we will continue to go down that road, and the permutations could be significant. And thinking about it from a long-term sort of future piece of things, coming up with more exceptions or different exceptions is always a possibility, whereas with criteria, you've got sort of clear expectations that are set out, and you can navigate through them.
I like the criteria. It makes more sense. I also feel like anything that you would phrase as an exception, if you reword it, you can also make it into a criteria. You just have to approach it from a different angle. That doesn't feel like a huge ordeal.
I agree. I mean, I think that for me, where I'm at, as drafted with the following conditions met, I think that's sound from a governance standpoint, and I think it communicates clearly with the public and future developers. I'm hung up in the conditions generally, and what I'm concerned about is creating a situation, one, where we have unintentionally created another loophole, or two, I think at in-state, what everybody wants to see is something that's contiguous, right? Like a sidewalk system that can get pedestrians from A to B. And so how does that work with, the number of plots versus the size of the parcel? And, so that's kind of where I'm focused. But I think with conditions is logical.
So what I'm hearing is that the width criteria seems a good starting point. And so if people are kind of comfortable with this, and I guess in terms, we can start thinking about these conditions, especially that first one. I just do want to draw attention that we're talking B1, B2, B3, R1, R2, R3, R4 is missing. That is the trailer parks, and that was kind of deemed maybe not to be as, sidewalks be as applicable to that kind of, that zoning. So unless anyone has any heartburn about that or wants to see something different, let's jump to the conditions. So that first one, Abby, I think, the subdivision results in blank number more parcels. And so I think this comes into when we start thinking about the number of parcels, is there a number, which you're right, once you hit a cul-de-sac, if you're just developing a cul-de-sac with maybe a half dozen homes on it, we can set the threshold high enough that it wouldn't kind of impact that. So I guess we could start thinking about there, or, Patrick, if you got some specific numbers you want to work with, or Ashley, if you got, some kind of, is there standards or criteria that, like a start number that we want to come up with? I mean, I've seen everything from, I think, Front Royal says they have one, if you create one new lot. And then I think, was it Abington suggests, I think it mentions like minor, which is like 30 or 40 or something like that, so.
Yeah, I think every locality is different. Ashland is 51 or more is a major subdivision.
Right, Ashland.
50 and less is a minor subdivision unless it adds new infrastructure.
Right.
Then any subdivision that adds new infrastructure is considered major.
What is a major subdivision from Farm Bill? What size-wise do you have a?
We don't have major subdivision defined in our ordinance.
Do you have a sense of maybe what is one of the larger subdivisions?
Mr. Lapp's subdivision, I believe, was 39 lots. Prior to that, you would have had like the Cowboys Court, Jesse's Way subdivisions, and those were probably closer to 20 lots. So maybe something closer to 40 or 50 might be a good starting point to start the discussions.
Because in the midst of this, we're not, I mean, is there any conversation around redevelopment or?
Are you talking maybe like a multifamily development or a commercial development or?
Yeah.
No, this is strictly subdivision. Development is addressed in the site plan ordinance.
So the number on the table right now is 40 or 50 as a starting point.
I'd advocate for something lower than that. I live in Jesse's Ridge, and you're right, we have about 25, and I feel like we need sidewalks, in that area. And so coming from that perspective, I think 40 or 50 is too high.
Yeah, I think 40 or 50 is too high too. I would like to see it more like 25 or 30, something like that.
Do I hear 25? Do I hear 25?
I mean, for everybody watching in the ether, I'm not saying two, but like, I'm just asking, like, how often are we, so again, like if we're looking at this holistically, right? Like the vision is a pedestrian-friendly town, and there are numerous streets where, quite frankly, town is going to have to figure out, and by town I mean town council is going to have to figure out how to prioritize and fund, putting sidewalks in place, because that, in those neighborhoods, the ship has sailed. But then again, from that holistic viewpoint, like how often are we subdividing a lot and building another house? And so then that's, 60, 70 foot of sidewalk that town no longer has to pay for. Like, I'm just trying to, again, if we've got the end state in mind, like, what are we, I don't know if I want to call it an opportunity, but is there a broader horizon for which to define this? Like, how often are we subdividing a lot into 2 or 3 or 4?
I would say we don't get a whole lot of subdivisions, maybe 10 a year. Those are going to be smaller subdivisions, creating 5 or fewer, 10 or fewer lots.
Yeah, so with that, anecdotally with that, like, if we're saying 40 or 50 or 25, but then the vast majority of subdivisions that we receive are 10, are we kind of missing the point?
So we're throwing around numbers, but just to clarify in my own mind, is that a number within like a set size of land, or is the size of land variable?
It's variable, size is variable.
That's what I thought, because I think Abby's suggestion of the density is the one that makes the most sense to me. Because, I mean, 10 houses all cramped together is very different than 10 houses spread out with, like 300 feet between them.
I also think, just kind of going on that thought, I mean, part of it for me is you're throwing out numbers, don't really have a kind of rhyme or reason in my mind in terms of how you explain how you got to the number. I think you go the density route. I think the explanation is there in terms of why did you arrive where you arrived.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're thinking this number, this criteria ought to be contingent upon density or lot size, which would vary from R1 to R2 to R3. Am I hearing y'all correctly?
Yes, for me at least.
So you're saying we'd have to have a different density requirement for R1 versus R2 versus R3?
I guess that's what
Yeah.
that's
I
the
mean,
question.
it would make sense, because
Yeah.
otherwise, you'd probably, if it was a density like what I just said of a, 1 dwelling per acre or less, then it would only be R1s that might not have to have sidewalks.
And I think using density is a logical way. So the first question is, do you need sidewalks based on your density and your zone? And then the second question is, what type of sidewalk do you need? Which I'm not sure sidewalk is an all-encompassing term here, and we have yet to define it. But then, I think that creates a situation in which you could potentially do what you're talking about in your neck of the woods, where it's, like golf cart path or,
Yeah.
whatever the technical term there is.
So is it plausible to do something like that? If
It's what y'all want.
right, yeah. I mean, well, I think we're kind of unanimous, and that's what we rather than coming up with just a number, a nice round number, even though there is some kind of logic to it in terms of typically what kind of happens in town. But to Cam's point, it would be nice to have a rationale for the number that we could kind of share with developers that take into the lived experience of people in town and kind of what we imagine going forward.
And do our zoning regs say anything about lot size for R1 versus R2 or versus R3? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yes, each residential zoning district has a set square footage of the lot,
Right.
Road frontage,
Okay.
and really a density level.
So it's something plausible that we can take a look at doing that. Okay, all right. Is that, people comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay, coming back versus like the magic number, or come up with numbers for different densities and different zoning districts? Okay. All right. Then the next thing, kind of related to that would be, if a single sidewalk is required, on what side, do we want to put any language in the ordinance that specifies on what side of the street you know, it should be based on. What would be the criteria for that?
I guess one easy thing is if it's adjoining to a street that already has a sidewalk and the sidewalk's only on one side, it should probably meet up with the existing sidewalk.
That makes sense.
What if that adjoining sidewalk ends up being, if you adjoin it, but it ends up being on the side of a street that has little to no houses though? I mean, like the fewer houses.
And the other side has more houses? So I guess my question there is, do you mean like the adjoining street has the little to no houses, or the new subdivision has little to no houses?
Like the new one.
The new one?
Yep. Like the new subdivision would have more houses on the other side of the street.
Oh, I guess my question there is it going to meet the new regulations we set on, does it have to have sidewalk on two sides? Because I thought the goal was if it is high enough density or high enough traffic, then it has to have it on two sides anyway.
I think it needs to be tied to the construction in some fashion, because I see what you're saying, but I do think there is theoretically a situation in which, based on topography or what have you, it makes sense to, you know, where the two new developments intersect, the sidewalk's on this side, but the houses are going to be on the other side. And so I don't know what that verbiage is. I don't know if you can do something like based on number of front doors, or if there's a better legal or technical way to say that, but I think it's got to be tied to the construction in some fashion.
The new construction. So it sounds like we have a couple, maybe not competing, just kind of different approaches to it. One is the sidewalk be on the side of the street that connects to the existing sidewalk, and/or that would be tied to the construction in terms of the side on the street, which is a bit larger number of doors.
I mean, I'm just throwing it out there as something that's easily measurable. And I'd also say, like, you know, because of tied to construction, like, what if there is nothing to connect to? Then does that unintentionally create another loophole? I don't know.
No, I mean, that makes sense as well. It's like serve the most number of houses.
Other questions, observations, suggestions?
I'm wondering if, okay, so this might be getting into the weeds, but if we've got a subdivision that, I think we need to have a conversation about where we require both sides to have sidewalks, because I absolutely see your point with like connecting current infrastructure, and I see Patrick's about making sure that the highest density has it. But I mean, if we're talking a density difference of like 1, you've got half a road that has a sidewalk, and then you've got another half of the road that doesn't, which sort of doesn't make sense to me if they're roughly the same density. You know, and we would look at that and think, why do both sides of this road did not have sidewalks, given the pedestrian and safety concerns that we know sidewalks alleviate?
I mean, we can pin this discussion and kind of have that one. I mean, what we've been talking about so far, if you look at the language, the town requires that a 5-foot sidewalk be installed. So I mean, we can talk about what would be some of the criteria by which sidewalks on both sides of the streets would need to be implemented, if you like.
Well,
Was
it's
the-
interesting if, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Was the A sidewalk kind of added as a way, just kind of recognizing the competing thoughts on the issue? Like, I was just trying to get a clarification as the reason that A sidewalk was kind of the starting.
I do want to clarify that it also goes on to say on all property subdivided, which would by default be both sides of a street. So within a subdivision, on any property that's been subdivided, you would end up with a sidewalk on all resulting parcels.
Thank you.
So what this is, so I didn't recognize that.
A 5-foot sidewalk is just a holdover. That's been the original language.
So what you're saying here is that by the language that we're looking at right now, it would imply that if subdivision results in, blank number of parcels, that would already equate to 2 sidewalks? That would-
Correct.
Sidewalks on both sides of the street?
Correct.
I'm not necessarily a smart man, but I'm not a dumb man either. And so am I the only one that misread that?
Not at all.
So I think we do need some clarity. If we need to so are y'all saying like you thought it was 1 sidewalk or 2 sidewalks?
No, I'm kind of like you, where I'm like, I'm not an expert in this, but I feel like I'm a reasonably intelligent human being, and I definitely did not read it as 2 sidewalks. So it is not totally clear, whereas the one we saw at the previous meeting, where it very specifically said frontage of each residential lot, that was very clear.
Right.
Sure, yeah.
So I think, we can have a conversation about this, but I think we need to kind of add some qualifier in that first sentence of the ordinance. The town requires a single 5-foot sidewalk, or, we want to have it 2, sidewalks, a 5-foot sidewalk on both sides of the street shall be installed,
Yeah, this language, I think, results in the same effect that it is sidewalk on parcel. So resulting parcel of a subdivision gets a 5-foot sidewalk.
I do think you need to add some clarifying language in there on whether this requires 2 sidewalks on both sides or just a single sidewalk.
Right.
You do need some clarifying language in there for that.
Right.
That's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
But I'd also say, like, I don't know if I necessarily agree that at face value, that a sidewalk is required on both sides. Again, like with one of the elephants in the room being like, how are we defining sidewalks? And I keep going back to your example, like if the sidewalk, in quotations, being utilized is a golf cart path, as in that you can see in Magnolia Green or Harper's Mill or what have you, like I don't think you need to have that on both sides more than likely. So I think we need to clarify, and then I think it probably might need to be clarified by density if that's the direction that we go. And Jen, I'm pretty certain we're already in the weeds, so we're good.
So, I mean, we can begin addressing that if that's going to be a mitigating factor, before we kind of loop back to whether we want this to say a single sidewalk on both sides, or begin thinking about the criteria upon which it needs to be both sides, if you want to. I know, Ashley, you and I had discussed whether or not it was, plausible to say sidewalk or, pedestrian walkway. Is that something that y'all would need a little bit more time to do some research on?
Yeah, I think we need more time to do some research on what a sidewalk definition is and what a pathway, pedestrian accommodation, for difference in those. We need more time.
Okay. Is that something that the planning commission would like to get more information on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, if y'all can do some research on that, please. So So I know that's kind of hanging up in the air right now, but I still think we can kind of come back and think about what would be, what do we want this first sentence to say, as our starting point? Is it, town requires a single sidewalk to be installed? And if that's the case, do we need to put some kind of criteria in there with which to put sidewalks on both sides of the street? Or do we want this to say, as it's kind of implied right now, but needs to be, I think, clarified, sidewalks will be on both sides of the street? Does that make sense?
I kind of think we could take whatever the criteria are that we have for whether you have to have sidewalks, and then, okay, if you have to have a sidewalk, here's the criteria for if it has to be on one side of the road or both sides of the road. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
I'm just going to make a comment on that, and you're speaking directly to what I was going to say. You can limit it to a single 5-foot sidewalk here, and I think, if I'm correct, we moved the sidewalk ordinance to its own section. Is that correct?
Within the subdivision ordinance.
Yes, within the subdivision ordinance. So it stands alone. So if you wanted to do like A and then a subsection A and a subsection B and define clearly when sidewalks are required on both sides of the street, I think that would probably be a decent way to clarify really that criteria or different criteria of when they would be required on both sides. So I think you're on the right path there. Just a thought.
I think that makes sense. I think it's almost 3. It's like, do you need a sidewalk? On what sides of the road? And then this is the type of sidewalk that is required. And like those are very specific and clearly enumerated subsections.
So if I'm, just to kind of summarize, so we can, if I can summarize, just to kind of, just to make sure we got a consensus before we begin discussing these next things. So what we're talking about is having like a multi-section thing, where, this is what's going to be triggered a sidewalk. And if that's the case, on what side it's going to be. Then here's the criteria for if we need 2 sidewalks, and then, TBD would be like what constitutes a sidewalk. That's correct? That's plausible to do?
I mean, I also think, I don't know how often I don't know if you require everybody to come up here, but I also think you could just put the sidewalk definition included in the subdivision definition section. That's where I would put it, rather than have it listed as a subsection.
What's staff's opinion on that? Does that sound keeping with?
That sounds good.
I just think it provides the clarity that I think that people want. And I think it kind of very clearly establishes expectations and, offers, it kind of, signals that there's some flexibility that we're looking to provide people. Even if it makes it a little bit wordy. As an English major, I'm not afraid of words. So, but I know other people. Okay. All right. So then kind of looping back just to kind of close some things hanging up in the air. And so at the existing ordinance right now, we're looking at the town requires that a single 5-foot sidewalk shall be installed, constructed, and dedicated on all property. But then we're going to have to kind of change in B1, B2, B3 when the following conditions are met. And so for the number 1, we're still comfortable with using parcels, but we're going to need to kind of revise that to accommodate for the lot sizes and the density, correct? So that's going to might change by R1, R2, R3. Okay. Then let's kind of roll through these conditions before, and then we'll kind of pivot to see if these still make sense for a single sidewalk before we move on to what would be a new language that would speak to 2. Are people comfortable with that? Okay. All right. And so we're looking at the resulting parcels require the installation of new infrastructure, including but not limited to water, sewer, and transportation infrastructure. Does that still make sense for a single sidewalk? That does? Okay. How do people feel about that? Good? Go ahead.
Sorry for being verbose this evening, but I mean, again, like, I think it's tied to, honestly, I only feel like 1 and 3 matter. Because the infrastructure, like, what if it's only 2? What if I'm only subdivided into 2 lots? The way we do density, that's not applicable, but because I need new, water and sewer, then suddenly I have a sidewalk, and then I've created an island of sidewalks because nobody around me is applicable. And then for 4, it's like, I don't know, I feel like that's a tax. I feel like we need to address number 4 as well in the density, or else just because we've identified it as a priority, we're taxing those property owners differently than everybody else.
Yeah, I agree with you, Patrick, that number 2 is just kind of like almost anybody who's doing something brand new is going to have a sidewalk. Doesn't matter how many parcels or how dense or anything like that.
Yeah, do y'all want to speak to kind of like
Yeah.
where that comes from, or like what the logic behind that is, please?
Any new single-family exclusive subdivision, I think thematically should have sidewalks, should have walkability infused in its creation. I think what that does, it frees up the kind of mythical Germantown Road subdivision that's been bounced around on a multiple lots fronting a single road that already has, it's an existing road and already has water and sewer infrastructure. So if it, isn't triggered by a volume or, updates maybe a density or lot size from the first criteria, okay, it's not going to require new infrastructure because it's already fronting on an existing road that has sewer and water. So that also doesn't trigger the requirement of sidewalks. So this is a vehicle to kind of, create a lightening of the burden.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what Patrick's concerned about, I'll just kind of throw this out there. There's a couple of lots that I guess hypothetically could be subdivided in the avenues. But since there's already water and sewer, there's already that infrastructure there. If just you split one lot and you subdivided one lot into 2,
Right.
then that's not the kind of infrastructure we're talking about. We're talking about major infrastructure for like a whole.
Right, so that would not require new infrastructure.
Okay.
Tapping into the sewer is not the same as, and I don't know, Catherine just brought this up, I don't know that we have infrastructure defined in.
I'm not sure, but new infrastructure would be running new water lines, new sewer lines that the town would then take over to maintain, not a connection to an existing water line. That would not be considered infrastructure.
Does every road currently in town have a adjacent water line?
And we'd have to see, it would be dependent on where the subdivision is located. Are you subdividing on a lot that has existing street and existing water and existing sewer connections? If not, that's something we have to look at during the review process.
I don't know. It feels, I get what you're saying, and I agree, thematically 100%, but like it feels nebulous in execution of the code. Because if every road in town has a water line and a sewer line, then it's a moot point. But if they don't, then I think that unintentionally creates a loophole. And then as an aside, if infrastructure is not currently defined, then we probably need to do that too, because that's not how I read this. I mean, I recognize that it's not, it's just not a connection, but I didn't read this as a significant infrastructure investment.
I guess my question is, what are you trying to accomplish through point 2 that point 1 is not already accomplishing? What's the differential there?
So somebody could subdivide 10 lots on an existing street that has town water and sewer available for connection and not be required to install sidewalks if you make that required parcel number larger than 10.
So is it trying to close a potential loophole left by point 1?
It's just trying to give an out that if you're not doing a large subdivision, if you're not creating 50 lots, you're only creating 10, and you're not creating any new infrastructure, then you don't have to do sidewalks. To give a little bit of a way out for some subdivisions.
Okay.
I think I would table this. I'm gonna table my opinion on this until we see the number 1 vis-a-vis density.
Are people comfortable with that? Okay, moving on to 3. Okay. 3 seems to be pretty straightforward, and it's trying to prevent some of those, those gaps in continuity and access that, Cindy, you were talking about, that, if there's a sidewalk that's, approximate to that, then there needs to be a connection to, the new development. People comfortable with that?
I think my only question is is 80 feet how do we get to that?
It's the minimum width of R1 frontage.
But it is up for discussion. It doesn't have to be 80. You can pick another number.
It seems logical. I don't have another suggestion there.
Now, here's the interesting thing. So it's saying it's parcel subdivided within 80 feet of an existing public sidewalk. So that kind of addresses sidewalks to a development. But do we need to address, or I guess, do we need to address sidewalks within the development? Or would that be kind of a product of number 1? Product number 1, okay. Okay. And then number 4, the comprehensive plan has identified the property to be subdivided as a priority for future pedestrian infrastructure. And I guess this is where the transportation plan sidewalk inventory comes up, right? All right. So looking at these, these look like some kind of major roads between, looks like 3rd Street. These are the checked ones with the proposed sidewalks. Looks like 3rd Street, looks like High Street out to the county line. Looks like Griffin Boulevard. Looks like Main Street, where it kind of connects to Main Street, right in front of Moton. Then it also looks like Milnewood, and then Longwood Ave that connects up to 3rd Street. And then looks like Persimmon Tree Fork. And then also that road, I can't see the road, it's that first left once you get outside of, oh, that's Plank Road. Plank Road. Actually, can you talk about this? Is this something like where, the town is looking at, this is just a wish list that the comp plan has that would kind of increase walkability throughout town on the major roads?
Yeah, so this was part of the Transportation 2035 plan that the town did in conjunction with VDOT. And it's kind of, this is an area that town wants to see sidewalks, whether we put that in the CIP or if somebody is developing in that area, that is where we want to see a sidewalk.
How do folks feel about that? It seems like an opportunity to use the ordinances to fulfill the vision. Any objections? All right. We made it. Okay, and so then you have, except as otherwise provided by the zoning ordinance, sidewalks shall be constructed of concrete. And so that's what the staff is going to do some research on to kind of see what, what are our options there, especially if we can, look at some ways to make it more affordable for the developers, achieve the same kind of, safety and walkability, and ultimately kind of pass those savings on to homeowners as well.
Can we put something in this about with what a sidewalk is? That you can't put like a mailbox in the middle of the sidewalks? I mean, that just drives me nuts in this town that there's so many sidewalks with mailboxes coming up out of the middle of the sidewalk. And and the reason it drives me nuts is because if you're a handicapped person in a wheelchair or something, you have no access on that sidewalk because we've blocked it with letting that kind of thing happen. So I really hope we could say you can't put anything in the middle of the sidewalk. It's permanent.
Would that be in this ordinance, would that be in the site plan?
So we cannot really dictate where the mailbox goes. That's going to be a federal guideline. These are rural routes, except for Main Street and a few other streets that the post office actually walks to, but everything else is considered rural route, and they have to have mailboxes for the mail person to drive by. It could look like it has to have a 2-foot strip in between the street and the sidewalk that would allow for utility poles, mailboxes, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that kind of thing would be.
Then we would have to require more straight right of way.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a general comment, that's probably something you would want to put in the definition of a sidewalk, like limitations of what it could and couldn't be. That's probably what I would suggest, but not a necessity.
I mean, could you just call it like an unobstructed pathway?
Potentially.
I think VDOT has standards for creating allowance space if there are mandatory obstructions like power poles, light poles, mailboxes. I think that they dictate that you have to create space at some point in the sidewalk for people to maneuver around the obstruction.
So like using rural route mailboxes as an example, rather than the sidewalk and the curb and guttering being connected, the VDOT standard would allow us to set back the sidewalk so that that doesn't become an impediment to traffic. Okay.
I was going to say, at one point in time when Dave Furlong came and asked for a conditional use permit for a property, that was one of the conditions we put on it. But I guess if the site plans don't have to kind of go through us anymore, I guess we lost that ability to kind of impose that, so we would have to.
We weren't able to put that condition on there either because it was a rural route. By federal guidelines, they had to put the mailbox there.
My bad, Dave, sorry.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, can we go back to number 4?
Sure.
I'm struggling with this one. Again, you wanted a debate. That's what you said when you walked in here. Obviously, I'm a proponent of sidewalks. I think that's probably pretty clear at this point. But I'm just struggling with this concept of, because I'm a business owner or a property owner on Griffith Boulevard, and I subdivide my lot into 2 parcels, I have to put a sidewalk there in. And I mean, that's the way I read this. If I'm on one of those identified property lines, and I just question whether it's appropriate or whether the CIP is the way to address the 2035 transportation plan.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're concerned about is if there's no existing sidewalks, say out on High Street, and all of a sudden you wanted to subdivide your lot, then you're going to have 80-foot worth of sidewalk and nothing adjacent to it on the other side. Is that correct? What do y'all?
Yeah, that and the fact that just again, it's got to come at some point, right? But again, like I feel like it's a tax on the folks that have decided to invest in certain properties that we've identified as, on which a sidewalk is appropriate. And I'm not arguing that it is, but if I'm the only one subdividing and nobody around me does it for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, then what has that done for me? Whereas the CIP, may not get a sidewalk from A to Z all at once, but there's logic to it incrementally over time. And so it might be that the CIP says, this is the section of Griffin Boulevard we're going to do in 2026, and then 2027 and 2028.
I think you could look at it, is that the undue burden? That, I mean, I know, that's been a part of the conversation, is that, that's a lot of sidewalk for split development.
I mean, how could that be handled? Is there some kind of administrative mechanism? Do municipalities do things elsewhere like that? That kind of remedy that?
There is, you can request a waiver to any of the provisions in the ordinance. And that would be an administrative waiver.
So we need to add that language into this ordinance as well.
It's in the beginning of the subdivision chapter that somebody can ask for a waiver to any of the provisions that are listed within that article.
How do you feel about that?
Is the process, then I think we're moving the burden from code to you. And so is the process to adjudicate a waiver stated?
This is where having as much information as we can on where planning commission and town council wants to see sidewalks makes it easier for us to know whether we can grant that waiver or not.
I don't know. I'm still struggling with it from a governance standpoint, because then staff gets into a place where they're trying to figure out whether this waiver for a 60-foot stretch of sidewalks is, meets the criteria or doesn't, but like this 80-foot set here, all on Griffin Boulevard or Plank Road, wherever. It seems like we're creating a situation in which they're going to have to approach that in an ad hoc nature.
I don't want to speak for staff or future staff, but I think if say it's like 60, 80 feet, I think it would be like, okay, let's institute a waiver if there's a aspirational CIP for the town to take the responsibility and do half a quarter mile, half mile stretches at a time, right? Is that kind of the logic of the waiver in the sidewalk plan with the CIP? Like then the town would assume that responsibility.
I would think it might depend on what sections the town that does have in the CIP. Is this an area that's going to either connect to it, or is this an area that the town has no plans for sidewalks in the near future? It would be a look at that.
So in other words, like this could be someone approaches you for a waiver, but there's an intention that within a calendar year or two that they might pave that whole thing. You might say, yeah, landowner, you gotta pay for it instead of us. That'd be a raw deal. Can we have your pledge that you wouldn't make that happen?
I'm willing to leave it in there and kind of let it, I know we've been talking for a while and digest it. It just doesn't, it feels like it has the potential to lead us into ambiguity that, is not good governance, in my opinion. But we could table it for now if that's the will of the body.
I'd agree with that. I'd probably want to look at the map a little bit harder before I voiced an opinion on it.
Are people of the same mind? Okay, so it looks like we've kind of nailed down, where a single sidewalk would be required, whatever a sidewalk would be. And so then it looks like we need to kind of come up with some criteria for 2 sidewalks, when we want to have 2 sidewalks as required.
I think that goes back to density. And what we feel is most appropriate for the density of that area.
Does that make sense to people, or do people have a different opinion? Abby?
No, I'm looking at this pedestrian accommodations requirements, and I just, I like this. I think it's easy to understand, but other than which of our roads are, over 400 ADT or 8,000 ADT and that kind of thing, but something that looks at, again, the density of the lots, the parcels, and then the traffic makes sense to me. I mean, if you're in a high traffic area with, a lot of multifamily homes, you might want to have both sides have sidewalks. But if you're in a lower density area with less traffic, one sidewalk might be fine. So.
But if I'm remembering what Ashley said earlier, I mean, the traffic thing's it's be easier to measure in terms of lots, the number of parcels versus, say, the ADT. Am I remembering that correctly? Unless you could use this tool, the flow chart, as a way to make some recommendations in the site plan.
That's possible.
I mean, I feel like after we define the density in number 1, like it almost becomes if it's this dense, if density is X and the subdivision is on both sides of the road, 2 sidewalks are required on both sides. If density is still X, but the subdivision is only on one side of the road, like again, could we not just tie it to construction? If we're addressing the need for sidewalks through density, then is that getting us back to where we were with loopholes, or is that, or an oversimplification, or?
Take a look at it and together with the attorney and see what we think.
I mean, I definitely am interested in the most simple answer, and that seems simple in my mind. I don't know if it works though.
No, I mean, that makes sense. If there's like minimal to no houses on the other side of the street, why would you have a sidewalk there?
Does this sound plausible, what we're asking? Does that mean reasonable? Okay. Well, I mean, I think kind of addressed I think the only thing that we haven't yet talked about, if it's possible to do it, and again, if I've forgotten something, let me know. Is there a way to accommodate or include language? And if so, what that we want to be is how to address phase developments, or is that still something that's associated with density?
I think I would associate that with density.
Well, what other information, what other deliberations have we left unaddressed?
I feel like we've covered everything. Is there anything y'all can think of?
What about the commissioners?
I would just say, I know we're very detailed oriented and to some extent nitpicking tonight, but thank you to staff for, I know doing this research and drafting this was yeoman's work unto itself. So thank you for providing enough for us to, or me, to have a substantive conversation.
I mean, I definitely think we're moving the football down the field and making progress, and I think we're thinking with enough nuance that provides the flexibility that we heard at our last public hearing that people would like, and are trying to balance again, affordability of housing, well, construction costs, but also, ensure that safety and walkability through town. And do so in a way that's really clear, that's specific, but that again allows a little bit of latitude, based on, where a project might be proposed. And so I feel pretty comfortable. And again, I'm grateful not just for staff, but for y'all for having this patient conversation. Are there other things you feel like we need to discuss?
I think what we've asked for informationally will help us to ensure that we've got, kind of specific reasons as to the points that we are adding to the ordinance. For me, I just want to be able to appropriately explain the why behind each of those points.
Any other further comments? Any other further comments? All right. Our next item of business is new business, and I'll exercise my prerogative as chair to say, thank you very much, students. Y'all are like the most patient people in the entire world. My gosh. Tell Professor Stanley y'all get extra credit. I will.
Don't worry, I'll be there tomorrow morning.
All right, let's wrap this up so all y'all can get to bed, so you got to get up early. I think it's early morning. All right. New business, staff and department updates.
The only update is our next planning commission meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, December 17th. At this time, we do not have any cases that would be heard before the planning commission.
Is it plausible to pull together some of this information so we can meet on the 17th to continue discussing it, or is that pushing it?
We have a holiday in between now and the next meeting, but we will see when we could get together.
I'll do my best.
All right, thank you very much. If possible, I mean, again, if there's nothing in the pipeline right now, I mean, I'd rather do it right than do it quick. So, I mean, I don't.
You gonna stay an hour after the meeting?
Happy to.
Other commission items? Other items of interest? Well, again, thank you all very, 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 very much. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Mr. Patterson and Mr. Crute second it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Have a great night.